Black Hollow was the kind of village you forget the moment you leave. A single road cut through its stone cottages. An old chapel sagged wearily to one side, and right in the middle of the green stood an ancient, covered well. It was sealed with a heavy, circular iron lid, and nobody knew how old it was. The oldest records in the chapel basement only had one warning: do not remove the cover. It is not water that rests beneath. Over time, this warning faded into tradition, and tradition into silence. Then the fog came. It crept in one evening from the marshlands, a thick, persistent blanket that refused to leave. It wasn't blinding, but it was heavy enough to mute all color and swallow the horizon. The sun became a pale, weak disk, as if shining through a dirty window pane. The air felt damp and cold, even indoors. Birds stopped chirping. Dogs howled at nothing in the dead of night. It was young Thomas Whitaker who heard it first, a small, grieving boy of 10, still mourning his sister who had drowned the previous winter. He was standing alone by the well when he insisted he could hear her. Her voice, calling his name from under the iron lid. It was soft, gentle, almost as if she were cold and needed him. His father dragged him away, scolding him for his cruel imagination. But the sound had been planted. That night, Mrs. Harrow, the school teacher, was startled awake. She heard her late husband humming the very same tune he used to whistle before bed. It was faint at first, then it grew clearer, seeming to rise from just outside her cottage. When she stepped into the street, she saw 3 of her neighbors already there, all standing in their night clothes, all staring at the village green. The iron lid of the well was trembling, not violently, but with a slow, rhythmic pulse, like someone was tapping from the other side. By the 3rd day, the whispers had spread through half the village. People heard a mother's comforting voice, a lost child's laughter, a forgotten apology that longed to receive. The sounds were never scary or threatening. They were alluring. They coaxed and promised warmth, forgiveness, and reunion with those they had lost. The village priest, Father Elias, tried to calm everyone. He explained that shared grief can play tricks on the mind, creating echoes in a small community. But even his faith wavered. When he leaned close to the well himself, he heard his own voice whisper back a confession he had never dared to speak aloud. He stumbled back, his face pale and slick with sweat. "It's not calling from below," he stammered to the others. "It's calling from inside us." That evening, against the priest's desperate pleas, the blacksmith arrived with his tools. The iron lid was fused to the stone by centuries of rust and neglect, but desperation gave the men a fearsome strength. With each echoing strike of the hammer against the metal, the whispers grew louder. Not frantic or angry, they sounded excited. When the seal finally broke with a sharp crack, the massive lid was rolled aside. There was no water glinting in the moonlight. There was only darkness. An unnatural, solid-looking darkness, like a pool of ink poured into a perfect circle. The fog that had smothered the village for days seemed to bend towards the opening, spiraling slowly down into its center. For a long, silent moment, no one moved. Then, old Mr. Caro, a widower for 20 years, stepped forward. A strange, serene smile spread across his face. "She's waiting," he murmured, and then he simply leaned over the edge and fell. There was no thud, no splash, no scream, just absolute silence. The villagers waited, holding their breath for any sound from below. Instead, something exhaled. A cold, damp breath seemed to rise from the well, and the fog thickened instantly, wrapping around their ankles and wrists like wet shrouds. People cried out and stumbled backward, but the darkness in the well rippled, as if disturbed by something large and unseen rising to the surface. Mr. Carroll returned at dawn. He was just standing there in the middle of the road when the baker opened her shop. His clothes were clean, his posture was straight, and his expression was perfectly calm. But his eyes were wrong. They weren't black or discolored. They were empty, not blind, just completely lacking depth, like two glass beads set into his skin. When his daughter ran to him, weeping with relief, he embraced her with a perfect, warm smile. "I was never alone down there," he told her softly. After that, the village began to unravel. Those who had heard the whispers most clearly were drawn to the well. They would spend hours just peering into its inky depths. They stopped eating. They stopped blinking. They spoke less, and when they did, their words felt hollow and rehearsed. Father Elias, in a panic, tried to reseal the well. He gathered the few remaining villagers who still seemed themselves, and they tried to push the iron lid back into place. But it was no use. The metal had become impossibly heavy. It wouldn't budge an inch. At night, strange lights began to appear deep inside the well font, shifting glows like distant lanterns moving through unseen tunnels. Sometimes human-shaped silhouettes would pass through the light, their forms dark against the glow, just watching. The fog never lifted. One by one, villagers would disappear for a day, only to return just as Mr. Carroll had, whole, unharmed, smiling. By the seventh night, only 5 people in Black Hollow seemed to have resisted the well's call. Father Elias, Mrs. Harrow, young Thomas Whitaker, the baker, and a man named Inspector Grunt. He was an outsider, sent from the nearest town to investigate the reports of disappearances. Grant had dismissed it all as local superstition until he stood at the well's edge himself. That's when he heard it, the soft, unmistakable voice of his own mother, who had been dead for 30 years. He dropped his lantern in shock. It rolled to the edge of the well and tipped over. But instead of falling, it just stopped, suspended in midair, as if held by invisible fingers reaching up from the abyss. And then, dozens of faces slowly emerged from the darkness. They didn't rise out of the well. They just became visible within it. They weren't monstrous or deep. They were familiar. They were the missing villagers. All of them smiling. All of them waiting. It isn't bringing them back, Father Elias whispered, his voice trembling with a horrifying realization. It's keeping what it needs. Just then, the ground trembled gently beneath their feet, the kind of deep, subtle vibration you feel when something massive shifts its weight far below the earth. and from inside the well came a new sound. It wasn't a roar or a scream. It was the slow, grinding noise of ancient stone shifting against stone. Something was waking up. Inspector Grant instinctively grabbed Thomas and pulled him back from the edge. Mrs. Horrow, however, took a step forward, tears streaming down her face. "They're not lonely anymore," she said, her voice filled with a dreamy longing. Behind them, the doors of the cottages opened. More villagers emerged, walking in perfect, calm unison toward the green. The ones who had already returned formed a silent circle around the well, their empty eyes reflecting the faint, pulsing glow from below. Then, in a single, chilling chorus, they spoke. "We were never buried." The fog rolled in, swallowing the last 5 resisting souls as the very earth around the well began to crack. By the next morning, anyone passing through Black Hollow would have seen a perfectly peaceful English village resting under a clear blue sky. The fog was gone. The birds had returned. Smoke curled from the chimneys. The villagers waved politely as carts rolled by. The well at the center of the green stood open to the sky. And if you listened very, very carefully, just before leaving the village behind, you might notice a new sound carried on the wind. A slow, steady, rhythmic breathing rising from beneath the ground, just waiting for someone new to listen. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Tales from the Shadows.